Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murders of Brandon Lamont Douglas, who was shot and killed in the 1200 block of Fair Oaks Avenue in Pasadena. Antoine Sutphin Jr. and Ormani Duncan, who were both shot in the 100 block of Claremont Street in Pasadena, according to LA County coroner records. Isaiah Daniels, Andrew Vasquez, Sherrod Robinson, Pernell Barnes, and Darian Lee were subsequently arrested and charged with the murders. The following is the evidence at trial. According to LA Sheriff Detective Matthew Thomas, defendants and their co-defendants were members of Duroc Crips, whose primary territory is in the city of Duarte. Among other names, defendant Lee was known by the moniker TS, defendant Barnes was known as Killer P, and defendant Robinson as Pac-Man. Between 2016 and 2017, Duroc Crips was at war with Pasadena Denver Lanes, whose primary territory is located west of Duarte in the city of Pasadena. PDL gang members were known to congregate around two apartment complexes in Pasadena, one of which was the Kings Villages, the site of both shootings. Detective Thomas considered the shootings to be acts of retaliation by Duroc Crip against PDL. At around 9:47 p.m. on December 22, 2016, Pasadena Police Department officers Larry Esparza and Aaron Villagana responded to a report of a shooting at Kings Villages in the 1200 block of Fair Oaks Avenue. The officers found victim Brandon Douglas lying on the sidewalk in a pool of blood. He was wearing a red hat and red shoes, the signature color of blood gangs like PDL. The victim's friend, Leonard Howard, testified that the victim associated with blood gang members, including Howard himself. The victim died from multiple gunshot wounds. Forensic specialist Katie Sullivan collected 5 .40 caliber cartridge cases from the scene. After analyzing the casings, senior criminalist Amanda Davis concluded they had been fired from the same firearm. Davis also analyzed 6 projectiles, 5 fired bullets and 1 bullet fragment collected from the victim's body, and concluded that 2 firearms had been used during the shooting. She identified the first firearm as a .38 Special or a .357 Magnum revolver, and the second as a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson or a 10mm handgun. Defendant Lee's Google account showed that on December 6, 2016, 16 days before the Douglas shooting, defendant Lee searched the internet for a man shot in Duarte. 3 days later, on December 9, 2016, defendant Lee twice searched for directions to the Kings Manor apartments in Pasadena. Kings Manor was another name by which the Kings Villages, the site of the Douglas shooting on December 22, 2016, was known. Defendant Lee then visited the Facebook page for the apartment complex. A historical cell site analysis of defendant Lee's cell phone activity on December 22, 2016, the date of the Douglas shooting, showed the following. Before the shooting, between 7:15 and 8:03 p.m., defendant Lee's phone used a cell tower in Duarte, the Meridian Street Tower covering the southwest sector of the city. By 8:48 p.m., still before the shooting, defendant Lee's phone had moved from Duarte to Pasadena, using a cell tower just south and east of 1277 Fair Oaks Avenue in Pasadena. This position placed the phone approximately 1,000 meters away from the scene of the Douglas shooting at Kings Villages. At 9:52 p.m., minutes after the shooting was reported to police around 9:47 p.m., defendant Lee's phone was still in Pasadena, using another tower covering an area south and east of Kings Villages. Later at 10:17 p.m., defendant Lee's phone used the Meridian Street Tower covering the portion of Duarte. According to defendant Lee's Google account, at 11:28 p.m., less than 2 hours after the shooting, he visited the Pasadena Star News website. At the time, the police had not yet informed the public about the Douglas shooting. On the evening of January 6, 2017, a candlelight vigil was held for victim Brandon Douglas at the Kings Villages complex. It began at a location on Fair Oaks in Pasadena, and later some participants moved to 87 West Claremont, the location to which police responded after receiving the 11:51 p.m. report of a shooting. Janelle, one of the 2 attempted murder victims in the shooting, arrived at the vigil on Fair Oaks sometime after 9:30 p.m. There she saw the people who would later become the remaining victims of the shooting. The other attempted murder victim, Mr. Wright, and the 2 murder victims, Antoine Sutphin, also known as Mutter, and Ormani Duncan. Also present was a man Janelle only knew as Kai, as well as Luana, Janelle's sister. Leonard Howard, Victim Douglas's friend who provided information in the Douglas murder investigation, and Miss Fernandez. Janelle testified that she was standing in the grassy area of the apartment complex near a tall, slanted tree when she saw 4 to 5 black men inside an SUV in the middle of Claremont Avenue. The men started shooting as the second car pulled up behind them. Janelle dove to the grass and saw a bullet strike the ground. During the shooting, a man in the second car yelled out "fuck slobs," a derogatory term towards the Bloods. Both vehicles drove away towards Sunset Avenue. Janelle sustained gunshot wounds to her legs, lung, kidney, and back. Leonard Howard testified that he, victims Antoine Sudfin and Ormani Duncan, were like Janelle standing next to a tall slanted tree when the shooting commenced. Howard saw a few cars driving slowly on Claremont Avenue before one person in the last car started shooting. In response, Howard ran around the corner of one of the apartment buildings. When the shooting stopped, Howard looked back and saw victim Duncan had been shot in the neck. Howard also saw victim Sudfin and Janelle lying on the ground. Howard went over and held Sudfin in his arms until paramedics arrived. Sudfin died from a single bullet that penetrated his back, lung, and heart and exited through his chest. While walking to her parked car north of the apartment complex, LaWanna heard gunshots. She began driving away but stopped after seeing Mr. Wright and victim Duncan running toward her. Duncan got into the front passenger seat, and Wright got into the rear seat along with Kai and Dijon. Duncan had been shot in the neck and was thrashing about inside the car. As LaWanna was driving toward a local hospital, victim Duncan jumped into the back seat. As he did so, he kicked the car out of drive and LaWanna lost control. The car crashed into a tree. Investigators later found Duncan's body on the right front passenger floorboard. He died from a single gunshot wound to the neck. Investigating officers obtained video surveillance from businesses located along the Lincoln Avenue corridor, which is approximately 1 mile northwest of 87 West Claremont Avenue. In close proximity to the intersection of Lincoln Avenue and Howard Street is an on-ramp to the eastbound Interstate 210 from Howard Street. If driving north on Lincoln Avenue, a car must turn left onto Howard Street before turning right onto the highway on-ramp. In footage shown to the jury, around 11:52 p.m. on January 6, 2017, 1 minute after police received the shots fired call, 3 cars were recorded traveling northbound on Lincoln Avenue in the direction of Howard Street. One of the vehicles, a tan 4-door sedan, turned left against a red light at the intersection of Lincoln Avenue and Howard Street. Between 11:52 p.m. and 11:53 p.m., the same time the tan 4-door vehicle was captured on video, the cell phones of defendant Daniels and Barnes used a cell tower covering the intersection of Lincoln Avenue and Howard Street. The cell phones of defendant Daniels, Barnes, and Robinson used cell towers consistent with eastward movement along Interstate 210 from Pasadena towards Duarte between 11:54 p.m. and 11:56 p.m. At 11:54 p.m., and while both phones used cell towers located in Pasadena, defendant Daniels' phone made an outgoing call or sent a standard text message to defendant Robinson's phone. On January 7, 2017, defendant Lee entered Google searches for Pasadena shooting this morning. Forensic specialist Katie Sullivan, who had investigated the Douglas shooting, and Alex Padilla responded to the scene and collected over 20 fired cartridge cases, the majority of which were found underneath a parked car on the north side of 87 West Claremont Avenue. Based on groupings of collected cartridge cases, senior criminalist April Whitehead concluded that 5 different firearms had been used during the shooting, including one .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, one .45 caliber firearm, and 3 9mm firearms. One grouping of 9mm cases was consistent with being fired from a Glock handgun. Senior criminalist Davis compared a .40 caliber cartridge case collected at the Douglas shooting to the same caliber case collected from the vigil shooting. She determined that the same .40 caliber firearm had been used during both shootings. Following the trial, the jury convicted defendants Lee, Robinson, and Barnes of 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and shooting at an inhabited dwelling. The jury convicted defendant Lee of an additional count of first-degree murder for the killing of Douglas. Defendants Lee, Robinson, and Barnes were each sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years to life on counts 2 and 3, and life imprisonment plus 25 years to life on counts 4 and 9. On count 5, defendant Robinson and Barnes were sentenced to consecutive terms of 7 years. Defendant Lee was sentenced to a consecutive term of 25 years to life. Defendant Daniels was also charged with and convicted of counts 1 through 5 and 9. Defendant Vasquez was acquitted of all charges. Brandon Douglas was 25 years old at the time of death. Antoine Sutphin Jr. was 24 years old at the time of death. Ormani Duncan was 24 years old at the time of death.